First things that I remember was my time in Egypt. I couldn't have been more than 3.5, 4 years old, I wouldn't think. I have a very vivid memory of drowning. I swam at a very early age. I was sort of on my father's back as he swam out to one of these big diving rafts that was out in the sea. As I'm getting up onto this raft, the iron ladder breaks off. It went on top of me and took me down underwater, and I remember that I felt very peaceful. I have a very strong image of breathing underwater, and it was very lucky that I ever came up.
Mick was born in Redruth, Cornwall, as we were stationed at St Ebble in the RAF. We were a service family, and that meant you moved about every 2.5 years. You were off somewhere else.
Dad was in the Air Force, and what we did as a family was sort of unusual. Most mothers and the brood of children would be left behind, but Mum was always with my father. So we were. We got posted to Egypt, then we came back to England and got posted to Norway.
He was coming up to 8 by the time he came back from Norway, and so he had to go to prep school. And as we were moving around, it meant boarding school.
There it is, King's School, Sherborne. It's, as you can see, it's a gorgeous place, but when I arrived here as an 11-year-old kid, I was petrified. In fact, really didn't want to be here at all. It seems unbelievable when you see how very beautiful this place is. I have strange but good memories mostly. I did a lot of praying here of how to get out. I ran away from my 2 boarding schools, and I actually did really well on a couple of my escapades against hopeless odds.
He didn't go for the learning bit. He had a sort of aversion for actually writing. I think it's because he knew his spelling was bad, and he thought everybody will roar with laughter at this because I cannot spell.
I would be hard-pushed right this second to recite in a relaxed way the ABC. But I had a superb ability to daydream to such a degree that I was really not around. I still have that, believe it or not. I think that's what keeps me sane. I remember I sat absolutely in tears, terribly unhappy, and made this whole imagination of where I wanted to be. And I made this complete pledge that I will go to London and be a drummer. I just got this thing about playing drums, and I truly can't really remember what must have triggered it. There's no doubt that Dad loved music. He understood the dance, the jig, of being a player. I think he had that naturally in him, so it was easy for him to understand what fascinated me.
He confessed that it was the only thing he wanted to do was to drum, play the drums. So he bought him a drum kit.
I have my drums, the radiogram, I got my records. I created a club, and it was called Club Keller. Club Keller de Silva, which is, I think, Latin for Fleetwood.
And for a whole year, it was there we had him playing drums to records, Cliff Richard and things like that. And he taught himself. And then he announced, right, school's no good for me, and...
We're here on Gloucester Station, and this is the station that I left for London way over 30 years ago. And both mother and father saw me off on this very platform. And many years later, my mother gave me something my father had written, and it's called Rockstar. Gloucester Station, wet and dreary. A mum, a dad, and a teenage boy stand together yet apart, dreading the last goodbye. The train door slams, everything tensioned, as all three unburdened thoughts unmentioned. Mum says, don't forget to wrap up and not to get a chill. We don't want to hear you are sick or ill. The boy smiles, don't worry, Mum, I'm as fit as a flea. I'll be all right, just you wait and see. Dad, do you think the drum kit will make it? It's in the guard's van, wrapped in a blanket. The train jerks forward. The umbilical is broken. It's raining. He's gone. They are alone. Still a boy.
It was 1963, and swinging London was just beginning. Both of Mick's older sisters, Susan and Sally, were already living in London, and Mick moved into Sally's house in bohemian Notting Hill Gate.
I had no experience at all. I had never played with a band. I'm sure wasn't that great at playing drums. And I went off with this pipe dream. I went to live with my sister Sally. She left home when she was 16, I think, which is unheard of. I went to London, and it was sort of like, that is a spunky thing to do. This is the same. Maybe
and that was a garage as well. Yeah. And that's where you came up with your drum kit, arrived from Gloucestershire with your little hat on, your tweed jacket, and Playboy under your arm. And I thought, oh my God, he's only 15 and here he is.
Her friends were all clothes designers. Her husband was an artist. She used to make silk ties for David Hockney, and Portobello Road was the place to go, right? I became aware of fashion. There'd be people like wearing those military jackets that cost nothing but look great, and they're tailored, and I'd be going, oh, what's that? You start getting this whole vibe of what happened in London. And of course, Notting Hill Gate would be the place where I would fall in love.
Jenny was the house model for Folan Tuffin, who I was involved with. I'm not quite sure if that was exactly how they met, but I know that he used to go and wait at the bus stop for her when she came off the bus in Notting Hill.
Jenny used to come to the coffee bar called Coffee Mill.
It was sort of an unrequited love, actually, for a while. I used to sit here hour after hour after hour wondering what the hell I was going to do. I never could tell her that I was sort of falling in love with her.
Mick always had this very cool, very gentle vibe about him. And so he sat in the shop and we just sat there together. But we were so shy that we'd actually go out to the cinema all the time so that we wouldn't have to talk.
Jenny and Mick and myself and all our friends, you know, we're all pretty much equal, and, you know, we just had fun. We were young, you know, it was exciting to be in London in the 60s.
Because I was working in the fashion world, I got to know a lot of people through that, and because Patty, my sister, was married to George Harrison, you know, Mick and I would go out to clubs with them, and of course they could get an in to any club, you know, there was no problem there. So we got to have a really amazing time.
There was this whole social fashion thing that then exploded with music. I was around all that, and yet I hadn't made it, but I was able to see what it was like to make it.
Mick was soon to begin the process of making it as a musician. He played with a series of bands on the London scene, the most successful of these being the Shanes. His lucky break had come when he was overheard playing the drums in his sister's garage by Peter Bardens, a keyboard player and neighbor.
My whole career started, it literally started out of that garage, literally. I had no contacts, I had no idea where to go with my dream of being a drummer with no one to play with. I'd never played with anybody, ever. And Peter B. knocked on the door
Yeah,
and said,
that's it. I'm here.
I hear that you play the drums. And of course I was
That's right.
playing the drums, I think, when he walked in.
Yeah.
One morning I came out of my front door and I could hear this big noise coming from underneath her house. It was a garage. And I was just inquisitive to find out what it was. And I peered round the door and Nick was sitting behind a big old drum kit, knocking all shades of whatever out of this kit. And that was my introduction to Mick.
I think the very first thing that Pete didn't play with me, he pretended to be a manager or something.
You know, I looked as if I could be a manager because I had like a brown Italian-style mohair suit that I was very proud of at the time. And I just had no idea. I'd never managed anything in my life. And I just went down the Soho area of London and started knocking on doors and eventually knocked on the door of the Mandrake Club, which was like in a little back street, kind of seedy looking, and persuaded the guy to give them a gig.
We were underage, playing in a club, served alcohol, in the West End of London. For us, it was wonderful. The reality was its days were over.
The audience was a little bit shady, kind of like a lot of prostitutes and American GIs that had been demobilized. And it was very dark in there, so you couldn't really make out too much what was going on. And I personally was very green in those days. I never knew what anyone was really up to, except it was kind of weird.
It was also the first place that my mother and father came to see Michael playing like he had dreamed of doing in the West End, in a club.
Turned out it was a bad night because somebody got frightfully angry and was throwing large ashtrays about. I don't know, something, having a quarrel suddenly.
Sure enough, right on cue, there was a god-awful fight. Their son was up on stage. There were chairs flying around.
Mick leapt off the stage to save Mum and Dad, who were sitting at the back. And that was quite exciting. So we thought after that, I suppose he'll have to get used to all those sort of things wherever he's playing, you know.
While he was playing with the Shanes, Mick met another musician on the London scene who would become his long-term friend and musical partner in Fleetwood Mac, John McVie.
And I was setting my gear up and we looked up and there's these two people coming down the aisle. And they were obviously related because they both had straight hair, both very tall.
And I looked like a girl in those days. I mean, I had this big, long hair and was this wispy, sort of girly, probably really quite effeminate creature.
The thing that struck me most was I couldn't figure out which was which, and it was Mick and his sister.
John McVie was playing with John Mayall's Blues Breakers, and that was, even in those days, was sort of, wow, you know, that was a big deal. They were sort of way more of a band than we were, put it that way.
I've always thought of myself in terms of a blues singer, band leader, and it's always been a great pleasure to me to have the freedom to pick musicians who I thought would be the most fun to play with and who, with whom I could get the best work.
I was asked to join as the drummer with John Mayall, John McVie, Peter Green, and myself.
John's a great bass player, and I think he really found his soulmate in Mick when they worked together in the Blues Breakers for that short space of time.
And that was the beginning of a relationship that later on would become Fleetwood Mac with myself and Peter. During my very short tenure with John Mayall, Peter recorded 3 songs, one of which was an instrumental. And for want of a better title, he said, let's call it Fleetwood Mac. That's where the name came from.
The group we're talking about is Fleetwood Mac, and they play the blues.
It was outrageous, totally outrageous. All the stories of, you know, dildos hanging out of trousers and, you know, cartons of milk being thrown at the audience. And I was pretty much nearly as bad in terms of encouraging all of that.
Well, Harold was a dildo that we used to strap on the front of the drums, and it used to go boom, 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 boom with the drums.
They were young. They sort of were young. They acted young. They're more clowns. They're more like young sort of clowns. Their idea of presentation is happiness.
That's what helped Fleetwood Mac propel to where they are. You know, is that they realise, look, you got to have fun, and this world's got to have fun, and not everybody that comes to your show has got to have fun. And that's what Mick portrays.
Mick likes a little bit of comedy in his life. I think you'll find. I can do without it. I want to play music. I like the discipline. I like to cover the discipline parts, you know.
You had someone like Peter Green, who's totally focused on this is what I want to express myself through. He had found that channel. He encouraged me to feel proud of playing the way I played, which I didn't really understand. I always thought that I wasn't very good.
Peter was the best guitarist, the best English blues guitarist ever, you know, with the most feeling.
About the shape I'm in, I can't sing, I ain't pretty, and my legs are thin. But don't ask me what I think of you, I might not give the answer that you want me to.
In the days of, you know, all of the adulation around guitar players, Pete just didn't want that. He wanted it to be a band that expressed themselves as individuals.
Fleetwood Mac's first album, Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah. And Albatross was #1, and we were met at London Airport by a cartload of photographers and microphones, and you're #1. That was, I suppose, something has happened here.
It was gratifying and financially rewarding, which was nice after many years of it not being.
And I think that, for Peter, became a major, major problem.
Peter came back, I'm going to give all my money away, what about you? And at one point I said, yeah, okay. And then Mick, so bless his heart, pulled me up and said, are you crazy? So I said, no, I don't think so, Peter.
Peter was in a lot of pain, and I'm talking real pain, and yet he was the greatest guy.
I think I might have been edged out. I'll ask Mick in a minute.
He left more for musical reasons. He didn't feel, sadly, you know, that we could take his next step with him. He had the beginnings of his aversion to being a pop star. And that all became part and parcel of this thing where, in the end, he just had to say, then I'm out of here. I've got to go. And there was certainly a catalyst with some LSD trips that we took.
It was fun in the sun in California with a little taste of acid. But when it got to Europe, it was the dark side. It was dreadful.
We went on our last tour with Pete through bits and pieces of Europe. Munich was one of the places we ended up. We got taken out to a very sort of jet-setty, hippie mansion outside Munich, somewhere in the country.
The carrot was this beautiful lady. They got him back there and did him up with acid for 3 days. That's the point where Peter left us.
I took LSD, and I never returned. I couldn't return. I couldn't get back.
The man had so much talent that was lost because of those people. And I despise them for that. So if they ever see this, don't ever cross my path. And I'm very sick.
Thing that I can relate to in the ranks of Fleetwood Mac. It was like, oh my God, I mean, he's the band. He's Fleetwood Mac.
Since that time, I would say that Mick was the leader in that he made Fleetwood Mac carry on with who he got in the band after that. He just willed Fleetwood Mac to carry on because he loved it so much.
Mick has always been very tenacious. He won't give up. You know, if he wasn't so tall, you'd think he was a terrier, because he's always, he gets his teeth into it, and he won't let go until he should have let go an hour ago.
Following Peter Green's departure, Mick persuaded the band to regroup in a communal home in the country, Kiln House. Keyboard player Christine Perfect was asked to join the band, having married John McVie 2 years earlier.
I'd given up my career with Chicken Shack to spend more time with my husband, John. And so we'd all rented this place called Kiln House. It was the old days of tie-dyeing T-shirts and smoking pot, you know, all hanging around the kitchen table and, you know, cogitating life and this, that and the other. And I was just sort of a housewife. And they were supposed to be rehearsing for the album, which ended up being called Kiln House, and they were definitely not sounding that good.
It became evident that Jeremy, Danny, John and Mick needed help.
Since I knew all the songs anyway, because we heard them night after night after night, I was able to go in there and to put some keyboard stuff pretty quickly.
She'd already played on a couple of the songs on Kiln House, and before we went on the road in America with that album, we asked her to join.
10 days later, I was in America, in New Orleans. You know, I'd never been to America in my life, with Fleetwood Mac. I couldn't believe it.
She learned the songs in New Orleans before the first show. It was a very disorganized survival period.
The band's struggle to survive was dealt another blow when Jeremy Spencer abruptly left at the very beginning of their 1971 tour of the States.
Jeremy disappeared. Literally disappeared. It was like Scott of the Antarctic. You know, I'm just going out for a short walk. I'll be back soon. Never came back.
They used to blame Mick for it. I mean, it used to become the standing joke, you know, Mick's driving us mad.
What did we do? Because all of the guys in the original band had something fairly dramatic outside of the norm happen to them.
Peter has set the standard, and once it sunk below that, it was then maybe Mick did pressurise them a bit. And I'm not really too sure, but I think that's absolute nonsense that he drove them all mad, because it's impossible. I'm sane, aren't I? But then I'm a keyboard player.
We would go away, do sometimes months and multiple months.
Dean McVie had another part of the house, and Mick and his wife, Jenny, they had another part. It was that sort of rock and roll euphoria, and they had what one would call a music room, where their amps were set up all the time.
It was a very, very strange way to live. To all be in the same house and all moved to our own particular sections. It was just weird. I suppose it was like a big sort of apartment block, really, with no privacy.
Mick had finally married Jenny Boyd in 1970, after a long on-off relationship. It was at Benifalls that Jenny gave birth to their 2 daughters, Amy and Lucy.
Mick and I would pass each other on the stairs and not say hello or acknowledge each other. And nobody else in the band seemed to talk more than, you know, how's Amy? So I didn't have a sense of identity, and I didn't have a sense of Mick and I having our own home together, because the home that we had was really a band home.
Life at Benifalls was psychotic. There was a lot of hash being smoked and a lot of pints being sunk.
When they were on tour, this huge house would be completely empty. It was just me by myself with the children. And then suddenly they'd all be back. Not only them, but the road crew and everybody. And it would be chaos and mayhem. When Bob Weston joined the band, he would come into our kitchen and chat. He was like a normal person. I suppose we just realised we liked each other.
Consequently, she created a friendship with Bob that led to them really, really having a friendship.
When I realised that's what was happening, you know, I told Mick, and by then it was too late. You know, the ball was rolling.
So I attempt to travel with my children and my wife, knowing that they're both together and we're all in the same hotel. And this is some sort of perverse situation when you think back, and I actually thought that I could do it. Why? To keep Fleetwood Mac together.
And so that's what broke up the tour. And Mick went off to Africa, and Bob got sent home, and I went back with the children.
The crisis caused the collapse of Fleetwood Mac's 1973 tour of America. At the same time, a lengthy court battle with the band's manager led to Mick taking over the management of the band himself, and he persuaded the other members to relocate to the States.
We went to America, did a long tour, worked really hard at re-establishing Fleetwood Mac, and during that tour, I sensed that Bob was going to leave.
In a break in the tour, a chance meeting with sound engineer Keith Olsen led to Mick hearing a recording by a then-unknown couple, Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks.
Mick went into Sound City, into the recording studio where we all worked, where Keith Olsen worked. Keith Olsen played him a song off of the Buckingham Nicks record.
What I didn't realize, but very shortly into the conversation, he said, look, these two are like joined at the hip. They're a couple. They write together, they sing together, they live together, they do everything together. So I very soon realized it was sort of like a joint venture.
About 2 weeks later, Bob Welch decided he was going to leave the group. And what had started out as basically Mick connecting with Keith Olsen to look for a studio, and Keith playing him a song of Stevie's and mine, just really to demonstrate his own skill and to demonstrate the sound of the studio, turned into a connection musically, which led to us being asked to join Fleetwood Mac.
I got the records, I listened to them, and I thought, well, Chris can really sing, and so this will be good. Lindsey and I can still sing together. We're not giving up that much. I think Lindsey thought we were giving up a little more than I did. And I also think that it mattered more to me to start making some money than it did to Lindsey. Because I was the one that was being a waitress, and he was practicing his guitar.
He could tell that Stevie and I had something that was a thread. It wasn't Bob Welch, and it's
Stevie and Lindsey, the eponymous album, went to #1 and stayed there for quite a long time. You know, I get goosebumps just thinking about those days making those songs, because it was fresh, it was magical and very traumatic at the same time.
By the time we got to making the second album, which was Rumours, all hell was breaking loose. You know, John and Chris were breaking up. My marriage with Jenny was broken up. I was the only one that was spared having to work 24 hours and be with your partner. So I was in the middle of these four people who were going through various forms of emotional hell. And we made and went into the making of Rumours in that emotional hell.
A lot of the appeal of Rumours was that it was a kind of a musical soap opera. I don't think that we set out for it to be that.
I believe it was Mick Fleetwood's idea to get us all together in one area away from our homes, so that we had no support mechanisms to depend on except each other.
The things that happened while that album was being made really defined what the vibe of the album was. I think you could feel the pain and the kind of frustration in the...
Back start to play again, and I look over at Mick, and he was sobbing about something. He just got another letter from his wife, and then Christine was yeah, I mean, I didn't know how to deal with it.
Whatever happened between Mick and myself, because Mick and I were such good friends.
You expect things like that to happen in Fleetwood Mac. I mean, nothing surprises me that happens in Fleetwood Mac.
Me and Stevie were involved together while I was married to Jenny. And I went to Hawaii with Jenny and my children, Amy and Lucy. And so Jenny was there, my family was there, and my relationship with Stevie was there, unbeknownst to everyone. So Jenny went home, and I stayed, made some ridiculous excuse while I was staying on the island. I mean, it's, and me and Stevie.
I was Stevie all this time, and I was stunned, and I realized that everybody knew, but I didn't know.
While in Hawaii with Stevie, Mick also became close to one of her friends, the model Sarah Ricoeur, who would later become his second wife.
I totally lost touch with reality. I really did, as did all of us, because we kind of had to stay insulated to keep going.
We were literally in what we used to call the bubble.
We were so isolated from the real world. We had us, and we had our immediate entourage, and we used to move in a big glob everywhere.
And we certainly went the whole hog. Instead of like 2 limos or 1 limo, which we were very happy to even be in a limo at one point, now we would have limo.
Mortified and embarrassed that we'd get into the limo and it'd be like people outside, and I used to wish, this would be my wish, that, you know, Dad would be a farmer. I really wanted him to be a farmer and not a musician at all.
My parents and my children were our built-in family on the road. Kept us very busy amongst ourselves.
They were crazy, those guys. They did jokes all the time. And I don't like the jokes, and so they, you know, I didn't want to always be afraid. Every time you walk in the studio, bad things could happen.
But there was increasingly a darker side to life within the band, as their drug in.
I mean, there was nothing that was separate. I witnessed everything, so I, of course, had concerns.
Part of my crazy behavior was when I look back on it now, was not being the father that I could have been.
He would, of course, sleep in, you know, until late afternoon, and, you know, I'd come in running in and want him to get up, you know, and it kind of was frustrating and confusing, you know, like, why is he still in bed? Like, is he ill?
I was concerned for a long time, and also just because I didn't have the closeness that I wanted, because it was impossible.
I'm sure he knew I was there, but maybe felt a little like, here I am, I'm right here. But, you know, he was busy being a rock star.
We all watched Amy and Lucy grow up without any of us, hardly, because we were always so busy, you know. And you could call in sick to anybody but Fleetwood Mac. You could never call in and say, I can't make it for Fleetwood Mac. You could call your mom and dad and say, I can't make it home for your birthday. But you could never call in to Fleetwood Mac and say, I can't do it, I can't come today.
My career was the one thing that suffered least, which is a sort of a telling story about what this creature was really all about. It meant Fleetwood Mac at all costs. We were in the studio, we were on the tour. We didn't stop. There was a survivalist thing, and I mean, the downside was it allowed it to continue for way too long.
During a break in Fleetwood Mac's relentless schedule in 1980, Mick took the chance to record a solo album in Ghana.
I felt sort of a bit tainted, and going to Africa was the perfect anecdote not to have to face the grim reality. This was a way for me of reconnecting musically and personally with something that really meant something to me outside of Fleetwood Mac. It's the greatest time that I've had as a musician to express myself.
His drumming is Mick Fleetwood drumming. He comes out just naturally through the end of his hands, and whatever feels right rhythmically to him, you know, he's got to have some African blood in him somewhere back there. He has to.
A lot of people, especially drummers, are good with timing as far as the beat is concerned, but his timing was not only the beat, but putting it together and keeping it that way.
That guy got the backbeat down so good. Nobody play a backbeat like him.
I wasn't a songwriter, and I didn't write songs, but this was my version of the whole thing was a song, you know, and it spoke to me in a really special way.
Music is his love. You know, it's two sticks and a drum. I mean, that's what he's about. A lot of people would have given up. A lot of people would have, especially with the damage that he did to himself. A lot of people would have just, he's a very, very strong man.
However, despite the enlightening experience of recording in Africa, Mick was still struggling with various issues in his personal life, including the loss of his father to cancer in 1978, and his sister Susan's diagnosis of breast cancer several years later. His own addiction to both drink and drugs was becoming damaging. It was only after he met his third wife, Lynn, in 1989, that Mick started to reevaluate his life.
For her, it was the beginning of a very lunatic relationship, because those were my Malibu days. This was a very new world for Lynn.
It was about 6 years. 6 years until we got married. So a hard 6 years. Lots of good times, some really rough times. The first 3 of those years, he was still drinking quite heavily and having a lot of fun. And I never did that with him, which was sort of odd.
The amazing thing is, with this whole cycle of these journeys back to Maui, I suppose, without any doubt, the most important one was about 8 years ago. I came here in wretched condition from alcohol abuse, drug abuse, a wretched lifestyle, and not a happy one. It was no longer a laugh, it was no longer funny, it was sad. And I remember going on a rampage, drank myself into a glorious stupor, made 1 million friends in 5 minutes, of course, and it was the next morning that Lynn said, I think I'm going home, as if not to bear witness to this disintegration of this crazy creature.
He was just wasted, and I was crushed. I had so hoped that this would be the change of something. You know, he had finished this album, and he had really talked about this trip being the time, and it was so obviously not the time. And it was really the worst I'd ever seen him.
I went in the toilet, and it had a mirror, I remember vividly. My beard was down here. I had a greasy complexion. I was sort of overweight, like a big sort of sweaty, greasy blancmange. I mean, I looked at myself, and I literally went, this is it, it's over. It is over. Walked out, I told Lynn not to go home, I said, leave me alone for the day and let me sleep my way out of this. And ever since then, I've been sober.
I think Mick made a choice. He wanted to be drunk. He wanted to be numbed out. He wanted to do what the rest of his peers were doing. And then I think that's the same way he stopped. He just made a choice. His sister Susan was ill at the time, and I think there were so many things that he really had no choice. It was either I'm probably going to die and I will not have resolved anything with any of the people I love in my life, or I better get my shit together.
It's changed a lot, and thank goodness. And I think my stepmother, you know, I practically thank her every day because I feel like she came in and saved the day and, you know, scooped him up.
She's really one of those classic partners where we do everything together. And the one thing that I never really learnt to do in any of my other relationships was to communicate. It's so true. I mean, unless you communicate, the good and the bad, and if you are going to communicate, you have to have a sense of forgiving.
But we're happy people. We're really happy people, and we've learned to appreciate all the good things that we have, and that we can share them together.
He's really there, you know, 100%. He's completely there and really fun to hang out with, and I really enjoy him now. Whereas when I was younger, I would always have this sort of aching sense of, you know, like, is he going to be okay, or, you know. And now it's just, he's just like having